Inflation up in Canada. Kelowna makes another list that we don't want to be on. Crossing in the border into the U.S. is now a lot tougher, and another piece of Canadian history on its last days. Mark Carney being evasive. JFK files expected today, and Trump to talk to Putin today. All that and a lot more on the Really Big Show today. I'm Jim Check with Kelowna Now. With me, Ian Burns on the phone from Ottawa. Beautiful day in the Okanagan, blue sky, traffic flowing well in our live shot here from Landmark 6 high atop. How are things looking out there in Ottawa?
It's quite similar actually. Very beautiful day, very sunny. It's about 6 degrees, I think, right now. But obviously with that sun, it feels a lot hotter than that.
Well, there you go. 71 days since government prorogue now. Sorry, got a little bit something stuck in there.
And then you have to add a couple of weeks at least to that for the vacation that they were already on. I think the last time that Parliament was sitting was December the 17th, I believe.
And there's one less chair in the House too, because Justin Trudeau took his chair.
Yeah, he did,
Yeah.
and put his tongue out like a bit of an oddball.
We've seen that tongue out in a couple of photos from the past that got him in a little bit of trouble as well. I don't know if he's
Yeah,
trying out for a
funny
kiss. Maybe
guy.
that's his new job. He wants to try out for Gene Simmons' role there. It's very similar.
Weirdly, I mean, given his personality, you would expect that he was one of those politicians that was also in a band. That's like an entire genre of politician, isn't it? But I don't think he ever was he? More acting.
Yeah, drama.
Yeah.
Inflation up 2.6% across Canada and 3% in BC as that federal GST holiday ends. But I'm assuming that when the carbon tax levy goes off gas prices here, we're going to see a big drop in inflation here in the month that follows, and we're going to see how much that actually affected the prices, because I'm assuming we're going to see a pretty big drop here as soon as that levy comes off, levy tax, whatever you want to call it, comes off on April 1st.
Yeah, it is going to be very interesting, that, isn't it? Because then we'll have the whole month of April. So we won't find out till May.
Yeah.
But I mean, sometimes this makes very little sense to me, though, I must say, because Statistics Canada said that the reason inflation increased was sort of on a national basis. The reason that it increased, or one of the main contributors, was because that tax break ended on, I think it was the 15th of February, wasn't it? So like there was a half a month where that wasn't in place, and therefore things cost more, and that explains that inflation increase. But if you look at BC had a 0.8 percentage points increase in inflation, which is higher than nationally. And yet BC didn't really benefit very much from that
Yeah.
tax break. So I mean, obviously there's a lot more to it than just that. I think that's an oversimplification by our friends at Statistics
Yeah,
Canada.
they might as well said because the sun came up and then it went down again. That's the reason it went up. Yeah. It is more to do likely with, like the tariff threats and that things. Definitely people probably buying more to stock up too as well. That could have driven some of the prices up. But we should see a dramatic drop off when the carbon tax comes off.
Yeah, that'll be a huge one, and that'll affect all sectors of the economy, one would expect.
It is a compounding carbon tax. We'll talk about it a little bit later, though. Kelowna makes another list, though, and this is not a good list. Kelowna makes a lot of these lists, and this is not a good list, right? So Kelowna had the worst rate among 49 urban areas in Western North America, and second among 300 urban areas across the United States and Canada for worst property crime per capita.
I mean, it's absolutely astonishing that, isn't it? To think like these cities, even just this one here that we're looking at, which is the Pacific. I mean, you look at places like Los Angeles, Portland, Seattle. Like, I don't know. I mean, if people have been to these cities, which I would imagine a lot of the people listening to us have been there, they have some exceedingly sketchy areas, don't they? And I mean, San Francisco, as we were talking about earlier, San Francisco is almost like a frightening place to be, actually.
Mhm.
It feels fundamentally unsafe. And yet there's Kelowna, pride of place. So that's yeah, like you say, that is not a list you want to be at the top of, really.
Yeah, no, it's I used to go to San Francisco a lot. I love that city actually. And the last time I went there, I said I'm not going back. So there's that.
The last time I was there, my wife said to me, I'm really scared. Can we leave? Like in a, she very rarely does anything like that, and yet she said that to me because a guy had just walked down the street and started to headbutt a lamppost with like maximum force, trying to crack his skull open.
Uh,
And I think that was just it, really. After having seen people injecting themselves into their stomachs as cops walked by laughing to each other, I think that was it was just like, okay, this is not a safe place.
And then it's getting harder and harder to cross into the U.S. Actually, the border patrol, they're actually trying to frustrate Canadians as they try to get into the U.S. there. And we did see that one Canadian get detained as she was trying to cross back in from Mexico to the U.S. They detained her, and then she spent quite a bit of time in a detention cell too.
Yeah, the immigration in the US, the immigration officials said that she didn't have a legal right to be in the United States. Um, so I guess her case is actually a bit more complicated than maybe it seems. But there's been a couple of instances where people that you don't usually associate with like ICE crackdowns have been detained. Like there's a famous one with a German as well who was detained. And I just think people are a bit spooked, aren't they? And I suppose that's the point. That seems to be the main strategy because Trump isn't really deporting very many people at all. It's a very minor effort in terms of deportation. So it seems that he's more interested in creating that atmosphere of, you know, b being unwelcome, that people are unwelcome, and he hopes that that will, you know, get people to self-deport.
Yeah, so the Vancouver-based immigration lawyer, that this story it's on Kelowna now, Richard Kirkland says there's likely to be more of the same this stuff over the summer, and Canadians should know that American immigration officers' duties are to frustrate instead of facilitate entry, and that's his thoughts on that. So definitely not as where they used to wave you through. Maybe a lot tougher.
I mean, the weirdest one, the most difficult one that I've ever had is when I was with my elderly-ish parents, and we walked across in Niagara, walked across to Buffalo in New York. Just like the weirdest situation. Like everybody was happy. It was a nice sunny day, and we were like British citizens trying to cross in with like parents and their child, and they were so weird about it. They did like absolutely every sort of scan and like just so nasty and horrible. It's kind of like it sometimes it makes absolutely no sense. And then there have been times when I've expected trouble and they've just been like, "Yep, in you go. Don't even look at you. Don't care." So I think it's really just down to the person a lot of the time.
Most definitely. And then the Hudson Bay, one of Canada's oldest businesses. This is a story Canadian Press did. We're going to do something on it as well. Empty shelves, idle escalators, as shoppers look for a piece of history at the Hudson Bay stores. Yeah, I was in the Bay in Calgary, and I don't know why they turned all the escalators and elevators off. Like, if you want to go upstairs, you got to use the actual staircase. I'm not sure what the deal is, and this is what this story talks about too, right? Like idle escalators and like the elevator's not working. Not sure why they turned that off.
Survival of the fittest. If you want the
Yeah.
best deals, you're gonna have to climb to the top.
Yeah, and it's in Edmonton, some of the racks at two big locations were picked clean. Every major mall in Canada had the Hudson Bay as an anchor. Um, the Hudson Bay is a big piece of Canadiana history.
Yeah, it's often like how you get into malls, isn't it? Often you go through the bay. So I don't
Yeah,
know who's going
and
to
then
replace all of these
and this
tenants.
in this story in Canadian Press that's on KelownaNow.com, they said that BC's flagship among 16 branches in the province appeared to be business use, but neither elevator nor escalators are working. So that must have come down from somewhere, like high atop to turn off the escalators and the elevators. Not sure why. And some of these, like locations had 6 flights of, like stores, right? Like some of them are, compacted into like up, right? Leaving customers to trudge up to 6 flights of stairs to reach the menswear. So I guess if you wanted a deal, you could also get some physical fitness at it, right?
Yeah, and yet they say in this article here that the blankets, with the logo on,
Yeah.
with the world famous Hudson's Bay logo, that they mostly sold out. And I feel like that if you were going to go there now, you'd probably want one of those, wouldn't you? That'd probably be the reason, and they're already gone.
Now, the Hudson Bay has been around since 1670. That's 200 years before Canada was born. I mean, it was a Hudson Bay fur trading company to start off with.
Yeah, I mean, it was the state in a large part of North America. That was basically bit like the sort of East India Company in India in the 18th century.
Yeah.
It was a bit like that, really. It was like the company was everything. It was the lawman.
Yeah, there's a bunch of outposts out there, including like Fort Edmonton, Fort Calgary, and the different, like Fort Langley, where the RCMP and I think British soldiers are stationed, and the Hudson Bay Fur Trading Company likely alongside that.
Yeah, and I mean they they did they did an awful lot, didn't they? It wasn't just fur. They sort of diversified. It's a really interesting company, and I can't think of an example of a company that's so closely entwined with the birth of a country, and a country's history. It's like maybe like the East India Company with India, but obviously Indian history goes back so much further that that's just a blip in time, really. But the Hudson's Bay in Canada, they're inseparable, aren't they?
Yeah, large department stores have been on the demise at least now for 10 plus years, right? With Sears, um, Simpson Sears prior to that, and the Bay Zellers, which was a branch of Hudson Bay. They got rid of Zellers because they wanted to strengthen Hudson Bay, and then here they are a few years later, getting rid of Hudson Bay.
Yeah, and I would strongly suspect that if this is it and there's no like white knight that comes and saves them at the last minute, I would suspect that their replacements in malls, it's not going to be one store, is it? It's probably going to be more like sort of 10 or something like that, or more. Like these, and if it's going to be clothes, it'll be like those little ones like we've talked about, like Aritzia and stuff, the ones and
Mm-hmm.
Lululemon even that shift quite a lot of product, but they don't occupy very much space.
Well, I was in two malls in Calgary, and the Chinook Mall is always one of the more popular malls in Calgary, and it was packed on the Saturday, absolutely packed. Like people were walking around in there.
Maybe
Electricity,
they should move their HQ there.
electricity going up in BC. Adrian Dix says that they needed with all the work they need to do. So we're going to see a rate increase of 3.75 on April 1 and the same bump next year. So there you go. They're going to try and make their money somewhere else, eh?
Well, I mean, a lot of it mentions in the story the Site C Dam and rising demand for electricity. But I mean, Adrian Dix's great plan is to build lots of wind turbines, isn't it? It's like that's his big, that seems to be his main sort of interest.
Well, we've
And
got
obviously they are very expensive and they have to be subsidized at the minute. So, I mean, I guess it could
well,
also be that.
we've got a story later on that he might get a good deal on some wind turbines, but we'll save that mystery for later as we go on here. So yeah, that amounts to about $3.75 per household if you're currently paying about $100 a month for electricity. And we've got a clip here from Mark Carney. So we're going to run this clip here first, and then we'll talk about it.
That's not audible, Rommel. We can't hear that.
Rommel. You want to try that again, Rommel, or do you know why that wasn't working? We can come back to it maybe. He's going to try and figure that out. We'll come back to it. Pierre Poilievre, you can put up the next slide though while you're trying to work on that. Pierre Poilievre has said that they need to repeal that carbon tax altogether, as opposed to just pausing it and keeping it on the books. And that's, he's saying if he gains government, that he will actually get rid of it instead of just pausing it. And then and Premier Eby says he's going to get rid of the carbon tax here in BC, and that's going to leave a huge hole in the budget for British Columbia. I'm not sure how he's going to fill that hole when we already have huge deficits in British Columbia.
Yeah, I wonder. I wonder what he's going to do because it is one of those it's a hated tax, isn't it? But in BC at least, it was a big revenue generator because it wasn't really redistributed, was it? It was just most of it was just kept.
Yeah, I think we're going to try that clip again. Are we going to try it, Rommel?
Look inside yourself, Rosemary. I mean,
Sound's gone again, fellers.
There you go. I don't know how much.
Suffice it to say, Mark Carney was very unhappy about being asked a question about a potential conflict of influence, conflict of interest to do with his blind trust, which has been raised by the Conservatives, and I'm not. I think the NDP might also have raised this actually, but anyway, it boils down to, from the Conservative perspective, anyway, they're arguing that but basically, in essence, that he's so in favor of green subsidies, basically, and has been as the economic advisor of Justin Trudeau, that we should know that it's incumbent upon him to make it clear whether or not he's going to benefit from that kind of thing. Basically, I mean, that seems to be what the Tories are saying. I thought they might have made the argument more about, is he heavily invested in the United States, or does he stand to benefit from Trump's policies, for example, because then they could try and attack him on that angle, on a sort of patriotic angle. But yeah, the Tories seem to be saying what does he stand to benefit from? And they're also arguing that the blind trust thing is actually a bit misleading because a lot of his assets, they argue, through Brookfield and so on, are actually like really long term. So he knows what they are, and they're not going to be changed in that blind trust. So that's their argument anyway. He has refused repeatedly to even engage in that conversation with anyone really. And there, I mean, that wasn't the only journalist to ask that question, but he was very snappy. Found that very interesting. He sort of just like he got his he did a like a he drew a line under it with his hand, like a little slice. And it's like no. So he's just he obviously doesn't want to talk about it.
Yeah, no, it's very like you want to compare him to Trump. Like Trump gets aggressive with reporters. This is a different type of aggressive where he actually tries to shame the reporter into even asking the question. Like it's just odd that he actually attacks Rosemary Barton there and says, "Look within yourself." Like what is that supposed to mean?
Yeah, it was rather cheeky. I mean, it's quite patronizing, and he is a little bit patronizing, and he's kind of there's a hauteur to Mark Carney. There's like an arrogance, and I suppose if you try and get inside of his shoes, I'm sure you wouldn't manage because they're probably a bit too small for you. But if you could get into his shoes and imagine what it's like to be Mark Carney, he has been in effect like a top 0.1% in life since he was like 17 or something like that, when he got into Harvard University as a kid in Edmonton. And he's basically just, he's been on the absolute sort of like top row of the global elite ever since then. So that's like, what was that, like 35 years ago, nearly 40 years ago? And I think he just kind of, when the little people ask him questions, he's like, he just doesn't want to hear it, does he? Because I think he's so used to being the man in charge and being the kind of like the star of the show. I think he really doesn't like it. And if I'm right there, and that's a correct assessment of Mark Carney, then there are going to be a lot more scenes like this as the electoral campaign gets underway, because he's going to be asked a lot of questions, and inevitably he's going to get upset with them.
Yeah, very evasive, and he even got stumbled into a few lies when he's tried to answer this question, and it's been kind of like rough on him. But he is heading to the Arctic today to talk about Canada's sovereignty. Any thoughts on that?
It's interesting. I mean, let's see what he says. But like we've said many times before, sovereignty, it's not just a case of getting your map out and drawing a line around something and saying, this is mine, stay away from it. That's not how it works. I mean, in the fantasy world of like the United Nations and all the rest of it, that is how it works. But in the real world, that's not how it works. You need to have a good claim, historical claim, and more important than that, you need people there, you need infrastructure there, and you need military defenses. You need to be able to defend it. And in the case of Canada, the Canadian Arctic is so sparsely populated that you might as well say there's basically nobody there. It's so sparsely populated compared to, for example, the European Arctic, like or even the Russian Arctic. There is just no one there really. So we can't claim it in population terms. And then if you look at the military, I mean, we couldn't defend the Canadian Arctic from, you know, name a country, Chad. If Chad sent a military expedition to the Canadian Arctic, we probably couldn't defeat it. So if he's going to go up there and just talk about sovereignty, then that's good for him. That's nice to hear, but it doesn't make any difference to actual sovereignty in real life.
Now we have to remind everybody that protecting our Arctic is NORAD, which is really comprised of Americans, because we do have a fleet of 40-year-old jets that are supposed to be replaced at some point, but now they sound like they're going to cancel that F-35 order, which Justin Trudeau vowed he would never buy in 2015, and then in 2023 he said he was going to buy them, but now it sounds like they're going to cancel them. And then up there are F-22 Raptors, F-35s, all American, and nuclear warships, nuclear subs, and nuclear icebreakers. Canada does not own a nuclear anything.
Yeah, nuclear reactors, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, theoretically, Canada has like quite a sort of glorious history in terms of all things nuclear, really. Like nuclear medicine, how they use I'm sure you know all about how they develop sort of really accurate tools and things, don't they, using uranium or whatever it is. That's like a big deal in Canada. Obviously, the civil nuclear program in Canada is very old, and it's pretty impressive in its own way. And then also the contribution that Canada made to the development of the atomic bomb that the Americans then stole and refused to share with Canada. So theoretically, Canada could produce a nuclear weapon pretty quickly if it really wanted to. And I guess that's going to become a question, isn't it? If we're abandoned by the Yankees down there and some unsavory types like the Russians and Chinese try and come and steal the Arctic, I mean, the obvious no-brainer is, all right, we'll make nukes and we'll sort of threaten them. But I don't know. Let's see if that happens. It'd be quite a scary world, I think, if Canada got nukes.
I think we definitely should be purchasing nuclear submarines and nuclear warships, and that. Whereas, the subs we have 4 submarines, and we bought them at a garage sale from the UK back in 1990. So they're 4 conventional subs, diesel subs. Again, they're old technology, just like our fighter jets, old technology.
They're also like pretty they're pretty crap, aren't they, those subs, because they can be detected, I think, now
Yeah.
relatively easily because the engine makes a noise underwater.
And I don't know if anybody remembers, but when we did buy the two of them, when we were sailing them home from the UK after buying them in their garage sale, two of them lit on fire. And we asked for our money back, and the United Kingdom at the time said, I don't think so.
Yeah, the British, I'm ashamed to say, somebody that was born and raised in that land, in that benighted land, the British haven't really been very friendly to Canada over the years. That's one example. Another example is just now, where Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, met with Carney and didn't even treat him to the privilege of a joint press conference. Just let Carney go out on his own. And that's when he made that. That's when he had a go at that Rosemary Barton, whoever it was. Like, really, Keir Starmer should have been there, just like Macron was, and sort of said all the usual nonsense about, the lovey-dovey stuff. It's like, so glad you're here, Mark Carney, but he didn't. It's like, where are the British when you actually need them?
Do you have volume? You got sound yet, Rommel? Can we play another clip, or do you know? Okay, no. So we're having some sound difficulties today, and that's just Mark Carney was trying to explain that like Canada needs to have a carbon tax if we want to do business in the European nations. That the
That
only
was really
way.
interesting, though, I thought. I don't know
It's so
about you, because
important. It's too bad we can't
that's the
get
first
that. And Rommel, if you
rationale.
can figure out how to get that, that's a really important clip there, right?
Yeah, it's the first example of a senior Canadian politician actually trying to justify the carbon tax, not with nonsense about climate change, because obviously Canada cannot do anything about climate change. It's scientifically impossible for Canada to do a thing about climate change. So it's a complete waste of time to do it for that purpose. But Mark Carney here has offered an actual rational explanation for why you would have the carbon tax. And he's saying we've done this because the US in 4 years, or maybe in the 4 years after that, will eventually return to caring about the environment, and they'll put the carbon tax in place. The Europeans do it, and other trade partners do it. And if we want to do business with them, they're going to demand that we have a carbon tax. I mean, if that kind of makes sense, though. I do wonder about. I wonder why he's so confident that it's going to last forever, and I wonder why he's so confident that, like, the British, for example, would turn down a comprehensive trade agreement with Canada just because of a carbon tax. Like, I'm not sure they would. I
Well,
think they would be so desperate for
I think
Canada's natural resources that they'd let it go anyway,
I think the easier question to ask is: so you're saying that the Europeans do no trade with the Chinese or the Americans?
Yeah, well, they don't do free trade.
No.
They don't do tariff-free trade. There are tariffs in place. They do it all through the World Trade Organization, and it's there's lots of protection that goes on. Obviously, I mean, that's why Trump is so furious with the Europeans, because he's desperate to sell them crap American cars that the Europeans wouldn't touch in 1,000 years. But yeah, that's the reality, that they do tariffed trade, whereas Carney's talking about free, like, full trade agreements where you actually, like, you have to sit down for years on end and negotiate a treaty. But I still think, even in that sort of circumstance, I don't think that the British or the Europeans would say no, based on, like, if Canada had a kind of, like, a bit of a carbon tax of some kind of climate change, like, malarkey in the fine print. I think the Europeans would be like, all right, we'll take that. Let's go. Because they're desperate for growth. They're desperate for energy, minerals, and so on. I think
Yeah.
they would nod it through.
I can't see how they wouldn't, and so it's just another way of promoting carbon tax. Um,
It's interesting, though. I have to emphasize, it is very interesting to me that he's trying to justify it along rational grounds. That seems to me to be a big change. And I think that's going to be the difference between Carney and Trudeau. Trudeau tried to appeal to emotions and, like, really abstract nonsense that didn't make any sense. Like, we need to do this because of climate change, even though Canada can't do anything about climate change. Whereas Carney, he's kind of, the assumption on Carney's part seems to be the public are not that stupid. Like, I have to give them a real logical explanation for this. And that to me, anyways, that's interesting, and that's like highlights the difference between the two men.
Well, then let's look at this poll. Angus Reid Institute coming out and saying, look at the Liberals overtaking the Conservatives now.
Yep, when they're saying majority territory.
Yeah.
And if you look at that poll, I mean, I'm sure I haven't actually read the details of this poll, but I'm sure they mention it. But if you look, the Tories haven't really lost all that much support. It's more that the Liberals have gained it, and they've gained it from the NDP. Look at the NDP there, down more than 50% decline for the NDP. So I mean, this is all now, it's all going to rest on the NDP. Can the NDP chip away at Mark Carney and the Liberals, get back to 20% or so? If they do that, they'll be doing it at the expense of
I,
the Liberals, and that'll mean that the Tories will slip through. So I think that's kind of what it's all about, the NDP. I feel like the Conservatives should give some of their money to the NDP
I
if
think
they really
that
want to win.
I think if the NDP wants to have a shot, they might have to do the same thing that the Liberals did with Trudeau. I think they definitely have a leadership crisis there too. Jagmeet Singh saying things that are just completely outlandish, and he's gone off the deep end so many times.
I also feel like he's never quite managed to break through. I don't think he's ever become a popular leader, really, Jagmeet Singh. He's always just I just don't, and to be brutally honest, I don't think he's like particularly I don't think he has a natural talent for politics. And I said this also about Chrystia Freeland, and I stick to that. I think that's an accurate assessment of Chrystia Freeland. I don't think her strength in life is politics. And I really don't think that's true about Jagmeet Singh, because he doesn't seem to know when to say things, what to say. He doesn't seem to know like the right time to make announcements. Like, he doesn't seem to get anything right. And I'm sure the NDP in their ranks have got some like union leader or something who's really charismatic that would be a natural politician. So I think that is true. Yeah, I think they probably should consider that, but I doubt there's much chance of that occurring before the election.
Yeah, one of our readers asked of what's showing up in the poly markets, and it is, and the poly markets are reflecting. They are showing that Carney taking the lead here as well in the next Prime Minister of Canada in an election. So
I
there
guess
you go.
people bet based on polls, don't they? So
Yeah, I
there's
imagine
obviously a
that
link between them.
there's an influence there, right? But it still has the Conservatives winning the most seats, though, in the election, so which is interesting as well. Once the election is called, I think we'll see a clearer picture. The polls are kind of all over the place. It seems to be a dramatic change in the polls. Big news, though, today, and this is what a lot of people have been waiting for a long time, even in Canada. The files for the JFK assassination are supposed to be revealed today. Trump says that he's going to open the files to the public. So,
Yeah, well, that's Nancy Pelosi in that picture, isn't it, that you've got there? Next to Kennedy. That just shows you how old Pelosi is.
yes, at some point, she must be retiring at some point.
Yeah, I'm sure when her heart stops, that'll be her retirement there. But it is
Uh,
interesting with JFK. I mean, realistically, what are we gonna see? I know Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the nephew of JFK, he's got all kinds of theories, hasn't he? And certainly about his own father. He thinks his dad, Robert Kennedy, he thinks he was murdered by his own bodyguard or something like that, doesn't he? Like Secret Service. He's convinced that that's the case. I'm not sure what this could reveal, because I mean, the oldest sort of conspiracy theory or whatever is that the CIA did it, isn't it? But would the American government really release that information if that was the case? I don't know. It would kind of discredit the CIA, wouldn't it?
I listened to
So I
somebody
don't know.
that did a lot of work on this and wrote a book on it, and said that what he expects today is actually that because Lee Harvey Oswald had been tracked by the CIA, and they kind of lost track of him, and they're just wondering how they lost track of him, because this was expected. So
Yeah, well, he was a very dubious chap, wasn't he? And he'd been in Russia, hadn't he? And married a Russian. Or maybe she was even Ukrainian, now that I think about it. But he certainly had like links to the Soviet Union, and yeah, you'd think that they were really watching that guy. But I think the old like, yeah, the CIA did it. That's the oldest one. And then the other sort of theory is that the bullet that the trajectory of the bullet couldn't possibly have done what it did, because it like wasn't there like 6 wounds or something? Like the governor in front of him got hit and it went into his thigh and his ribs and everything. And the argument is that they weren't level, were they? They weren't in line. So the theory is that the bullet kind of moved inside of Kennedy's body or something like that. But I mean, let's see. I mean, it
Well,
would be nice, wouldn't it, if we could finally put all this to bed and then the
let's
conspiracy theories could be settled.
let's hope this isn't as anticlimactic as the Epstein files, which are still, we were supposed to get that big reveal, and we really got nothing on that day, and then supposedly there's more coming. But
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like it's just bait, really, isn't it, for the sort of supporters of Donald Trump? But let's see. I don't know. The JFK thing has been talked about for a while, like to release the files, because there was something, wasn't there some guy that died recently that he was like one of the last holdouts who was still alive, and they didn't want to kind of violate his privacy or something like that. And now there's like a real option to release the files. I don't know. I mean, I would expect more from this than the Epstein one anyway, put it that way.
ask now what you can do for, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Yeah, you couldn't say that you wouldn't hear a Democrat say that these days anyway. Would you?
JFK, one of the most famous Democrats, and like a storied history for JFK. And then famously, too, also with Jackie Onassis and Jackie Onassis Kennedy, Onassis later, and then Marilyn Monroe. JFK, lots of mystery in that man, for sure.
Yeah, very strange fellow. Became a bit of a drug addict in his final days, and obviously was incapable of standing upright or walking, so he became basically disabled drug addict in his last few weeks or months, and was also a notorious philanderer, wasn't he? The women used to come in, used to get them, used to get the Secret Service, I think, to kind of like bundle them up to his private quarters.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
very much not the myth. Like he was a real man, like a very flawed,
yeah,
strange man in many ways. But I
and
mean, still obviously a sort of natural politician, like we were saying
surrounded
earlier. He would be a good leader of the NDP.
surrounded by death, a lot of it, assassinations before, during his life, after, and suicides. A lot of that going on in JFK's kind of like circle.
Yeah. Um, I mean, it was a very different time, wasn't it? The 60s. The assassinations and stuff like it's hard for us to imagine. I suppose if that assassination had succeeded against Trump, maybe we would have entered another era like that. But yeah, it's just so many politicians being just like offed in those days, being killed. But he was also in the Second World War, wasn't he? So I guess John F. Kennedy, he did encounter quite a lot of death, sadly, in all realms of life.
And another big news, another president, President Trump, going to speak with President Putin today, and then we'll see if they get that ceasefire they've been talking about, right?
Well, Putin is kind of playing silly buggers, isn't he now? And he's being very slippery and very hard to pin him down on anything. So I think it really does kind of boil down to this phone call. Is there anything that Trump can say to him that I guess threats? Because he's threatened to tariff Russia, but obviously the Russians, they're already tariffed to the max, aren't they? They don't really care. They're basically self-sufficient at this point, alongside China, like with China, I mean, as a supplier of a lot of goods. So I feel like that's not going to work. Maybe he's got something else up his sleeve. I don't know.
I think one of the things that, like I've heard some rumors out there is that, they're going to free up some of that stuff that's been frozen, some of those Russian assets that have been frozen. I wonder what would happen if like they unfreeze things and they go back, because a lot of American companies left Russia at that time. Even McDonald's, they just took them all over, and they basically have a similar look to McDonald's, and just that they just renamed it, have basically the same food and everything.
Yeah, and there's also like there's that a lot of middlemen have popped up in countries like the Central Asian countries, China, India, and they're kind of like they're dealing with a lot of the oil. Obviously, the Russian oil is still getting out there. They're just selling it to India first and other places, and
And
then
we're
India
buying it
sells
as
it
well.
on.
Yeah, we get it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but also just things like Gucci and all these sort of things that the oligarchs love in Moscow. Like they're still getting it. It's still coming in. It's just they buy it in like I don't know Kazakhstan or somewhere like that, and then just get it up, take it over the border, and Bob's your uncle. Add a little premium on top. The oligarchs don't mind because they got a lot of rubles to flash, and then that's it. So I mean, it was kind of in the event, nothing really changed. And then that McDonald's thing, that is quite funny, isn't it? Because it's just like such a brazen rip-off. But they seem to like it anyway. It's doing quite well, last I heard.
Yeah. And then CBC had an article and says nearly 500,000 fewer travelers crossed the land border from Canada to the U.S. in February compared to same month last year. And a lot of that has to do with tariffs being charged as Canadians return home, because a lot of people would go across the border to get cheap gas and cheaper groceries, and then they were starting to get tagged at the border, and like sometimes even doubling the cost of what they paid down there. So that definitely has dropped a lot of people off, as well as some people like listening to the message and not going to the U.S. too. But I think a lot of it has to do with it's just not economically worthwhile to go to the States to get the groceries and the cheap gas, because it is way cheaper gas down there. Like in some cases, like 87 cents or 83 cents a liter.
Yeah, it's not the only sort of thing that's cheaper, is it? I mean, even electronics and stuff like that can be cheaper, and sometimes food as well. It's kind of, I mean, it's not ideal, is it, having that country just right down there, and then basically, the majority of Canadians live within driving distance of the US. So it's like a hell of a temptation. But yeah, I mean, the people there, the people that serve these Canadians that come down and buy stuff in this article, they're saying, I mean, there's a quote there, without hyperbole, it's a dire situation. It's pandemic level stuff, this person says. So it's kind of like they're freaking out, the ones that kind of make money off that arbitrage and sort of serve the Canadians. But I think it's also tourism as well. I mean, I think a lot of people are gonna not go to the US this year, at least this year. So I
Well,
think it's definitely gonna have an effect from this sort of political, cultural side as well.
there's a mall just south of Vancouver, in between Seattle and Vancouver, Tulalip, which was an outlet mall. And this is a number of years ago. And I'd asked a couple questions there. 95% of the traffic in that mall, like the buyers in there, were from Vancouver. Like it was mostly Canadians that were, like buying the stuff in that mall.
Yeah. Well, people even and this happens in Vancouver, doesn't it? People like rent out a little store box or something like that, or a mailbox, don't they? And I think it's Blaine's they do it in Washington.
Yeah.
And then they order things online to that box, and then they drive across the border and get it because it's worth their while to do it. I mean, it's that would always happen. That has always happened throughout history, hasn't it? Like if you look at old empires and things like that, like it's always happened that people will go to great lengths to get cheaper product. So it's
Yeah,
not
there was
surprising, really, is it?
in our own little backyard here, in just across the border in Osoyoos, there's a town called Oroville, which was like an older town. It was kind of depressed, and an old bookstore, and they set up a post office, like a makeshift post office for Canadians, and they were just booming. I remember going in there a couple of times, and the amount of traffic in there was just crazy. And they were just like, their bookstore wasn't doing anything but this being a drop center, because a lot of free shipping in the U.S. So you get free shipping across the U.S., but getting shipping into Canada was super expensive. So people would just get it shipped there for free and then drive across the border and pick it up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, makes absolute sense, doesn't it? But if it is actually the case that, I think if they put this permanent tariff on sort of thing where you try and buy your groceries in the US and come back and then get tariffed, if that stays on, then that's going to put people off, isn't it? That's going to shoot the numbers down. And then if the political situation persists, it seems like this sort of whole trade is going to collapse, isn't it?
So, you put in a story here that a sad story actually, the passing of John Paddy Hemingway, last of the few.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend people have a look at his biography, have a read about him, because he's an absolutely astonishing man. I mean, he was involved in something like 4 or 5 plane crashes, including being shot down. Like had to parachute out. His parachute didn't work on one occasion. He got stuck in a tree. Born in Dublin as well, so he's actually an Irishman, but he went over and wanted to join the RAF in England. But yeah, I mean, it's a little bit sad, I must say as well. It's a bit like when the Queen died. It just feels like these people from another era have died, and they were just giants, and we're sat here like wolves trying to look up at them, and we can't even like see their heads because they're so much bigger than us. We are so like inferior compared to these people from the past, and I don't know. There's something like really sad about that. I think that's particularly poignant from the British perspective, because obviously during the Battle of Britain in 1940, Britain was still the sort of largest empire in the world, and it was still, it was still the big boy. And this guy has lived through all of that. He's lived through Britain being the most powerful sort of force on earth, having the largest navy in the world and all the rest of it. And for a brief time during this sort of era, probably the best air force in the world as well. He's seen all that come crashing down, and then so he was alive a couple of days ago. Just look at the state of Britain. It's just like a medium sort of mid-ranking power with a low standard of living, and can't project power really anywhere, do anything. Nobody's scared of it particularly. It's just kind of like it's just a vassal of the United States, really. So I just think that's there's something very sad about that for me, I think, and it was the same with the Queen.
Yes, sadly, he passed away at 105. A nice long life, though. It seemed to have some horseshoes there with, like what you're saying, some of the crashes and that. And
Luck of the Irish. That's what
luck
he
of
said.
the Irish. There you go. And then, and he fought in the Battle of Britain. So
I'm not sure what day actually died, but if it was yesterday, then he died on St. Paddy's Day as well, which would just be astonishing if that's right. What a life.
let's move on to markets. Gold finally found some energy and broke through that $3,000 mark that we were talking about, and it broke through with some emphasis too. Like at right now, it's trading at 3034, which is higher than when we pulled this. So gold finding some energy. Lots of times when it breaks through, it'll break through strong as well, and it looks like it did just that. In Canadian dollars, 43.41, up $52 this morning. And again, geopolitical situations really playing a lot into that, and market instability and all that kind of stuff. Like definitely gold is the canary in the coal mine and the safe haven asset that many people say is an old relic, but obviously not that old of a relic because people still value it.
Well, I wonder if this little surge here is related to the rumors, I guess you would call them, all the chatter about a potential war with Iran being on the cards, a US-Israeli operation against Iran.
I don't know like how much that would go, but geopolitical tensions definitely always play into gold for sure. Gold is a safe haven asset that has been tested through thousands and thousands of years of history, even though some people would like to say that it is an old relic, but people seem to go back. It's kind of a cool metal too. Like if you understand the properties of gold, it is one of the most incredible metals on this planet, one of the heaviest as well, and it doesn't tarnish or rust or anything like that too. And
archaeologists love it.
And one of the best semiconductors too for heat, right?
Yeah, it's important in chips, isn't it? And computing as well.
They use it in health. They use it in a whole bunch of things. Yeah, it's in most computers, like little small amounts are in computers, phones, all kinds of stuff, right? It's everywhere. Bitcoin, what the young people would call the new gold. Hard to touch though. Hard to touch, hold, and feel. Still playing around with that $80,000 mark there. Looking like it wants to challenge that 100,000 mark again though. So for right now, taking a rest while gold takes center stage. How's that? Gold on the stage, Bitcoin backstage right now. Canadian dollar. You had a point you wanted to bring up there where somebody was blaming the Canadian dollar for the Trump tariffs.
Yeah, let's see. It's the CBC article. The CBC in the middle of that article, because they mentioned the possibility of the exchange rate, the weak loonie being responsible for a decline in traffic south. And then the CBC put in, this is the sentence. They said the poor Canada-US exchange rate, which is partly driven by Trump's trade policies, has made jaunts over the border less attractive for many Canadians. But it's kind of when we look at this chart here, so Trump was elected in November. I mean, there is a little bit of a decline, but it's it's about a cent, isn't it? About 2 cents. And if you go back further, the declines, I mean, you go back there to September, that's the real decline, isn't it? Where you see like 4 cent decline. And that's before Trump was elected. So
obviously, CBC needs that increase in their budget so they can buy a way to get to a chart, a link to a chart that actually shows the picture of the Canadian dollar.
indeed. But I mean, I feel like for once they don't need to exaggerate to get people to hate Donald Trump. Like I think he's hated plenty already, and for very good reason. So you might as well just keep it real,
Yeah, because this is easy to debunk, right? You just have to look at it and see that is.
Indeed.
Your eyes are not lying to you. It's not a vibe. It's the real deal. In our AI and tech section, and stranded up there for like 8 months, left there, and we got there, actually leaving home, and this is the capsule departing ISS. We're going to play this clip here. Maybe we'll even have sound, but start at 0.26 and play this clip. There you go. There you go. SpaceX to the rescue. And they did, those two astronauts did thank Elon Musk for the rescue. But they left him there.
Very embarrassing for Boeing.
They left him there, and the SpaceX volunteered to go get him a long time ago, and they said not necessary. I'm not sure why it wasn't necessary.
Because it would be, well, I mean, they have their own reasons, but I mean, certainly it can't have helped that it generated an enormous amount of humiliation for the company that put them up there and couldn't get them back.
Yep. Anyway, there you go. There you go. Schools are going to use AI to monitor students. Who would have saw that coming, right? Over 1,500 school districts. I mean, over 1,500 school districts across the U.S. are using AI-powered surveillance software, such as Gaggle, I guess that's the new Google, to monitor students' online activities, aiming to prevent violence and identify mental health concerns. There you go.
It scans messages and social media posts for signs of potential harm. I mean, it's not often that I use the word Orwellian, but there's no other word, is there? That is George Orwell on steroids.
And then, and here you go. And Chrystia Freeland watches regularly, and she's the transport minister now, and they're looking to build wind farms here. There you go. Germany is about to dismantle their wind farms after 15 years of operation, so there might be a bargain basement sale on some wind farms.
Well, I think part of the reason that they're doing it is because they've put them in the sea. Obviously, these are offshore. This is Germany's first offshore wind farm, and as some people know, as a minority of boffins are aware, salt will corrode wind farms, or the technology that they use, the metal that they use. So it's obviously not going to be in very good nick.
That's the same people that couldn't figure out how to get a chart of the Canadian dollar, the same people not realizing that metal corrodes in the ocean.
And also, I mean, the real reason that this is the real reason that they've decommissioned it now, so it's only been up 15 years. But the reason they're getting rid of it is because there's no longer going to be a subsidy, very, very generous subsidy for wind power, which is the case basically everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere that there's wind power, there's a huge subsidy, and obviously because it's intermittent, it is in terms of like the per kilowatt hour or whatever generated, it's an exceedingly expensive form of energy, so it's just not economical without taxpayers subsidizing it.
Brookfield Asset Management, big on the green energy. There you go. Maybe they can buy those and redeploy them here in Canada.
The little known former chairman of Brookfield Asset Management is also a big fan of green technology, isn't he? So I'm sure we'll be seeing more of that as he leads Canada now.
I'm sure Chrystia Freeland is scratching down the notes right now. We're giving her lots of good information here. So there you go.
Absolutely.
BYD introduces ultra-fast EV charging technology. So they're saying they can charge cars in 5 minutes, about 250 miles of range. That's pretty impressive. So that was one of the big knocks on EVs, is that it takes time to charge, although they charge pretty quick. I drive one, but 5 minutes would be pretty impressive if you get that juice in it. BYDs are not available for sale in Canada and the US. That's those 100% tariffs that Canada and the US put on these things when Biden was in power, and Biden and Trudeau put these 100% tariffs on, which Scott Moe is really angry about, because the farmers are the ones that are getting the bad end of the stick on that, because now there's tariffs on canola and other agricultural products, and it's really harming Saskatchewan and Alberta. And he says that whenever it is Eastern jobs, the government reacts, but when it's Western, then not much is said.
And particularly, I think agriculture. There's a kind of, I don't know if it's just ignorance or snobbery or what, but there's a real like there's not much love for agriculture when it comes to the sort of Laurentian elite, let's say, except for dairy, obviously. If you count that as agriculture, they love that.
When the new finance minister, Francois-Philippe Champagne, was asked if they would remove the Chinese tariffs so that they would, they wouldn't retaliate against Canadian agriculture, he said, absolutely not. We are protecting jobs, just not the jobs in the West.
Yeah, that's strictly true, but it depends on the kind of job that you're trying to protect.
Yeah.
But I am interested in this BYD thing, though. I mean, is that unique to them? Because I know you, as a sort of Tesla expert, you would know if Tesla has this kind of thing up their sleeve.
A lot of this is coming. Like a lot of them are working on it. BYD is definitely the closest competition to Tesla. And they're definitely selling their cars in other markets other than China. Australia, for one, I think in the UK has these vehicles. In China, Europe, they're selling vehicles. They're actually building plants. What they're doing in Europe is actually buying plants that are going bankrupt, traditional ICE plants, and then converting them into Chinese EV plants.
Yeah. Well, if this is for real, and they can actually you can do 400 kilometers in 5 minutes, I would say that's going to be an enormous revolutionary moment in the sort of history of EVs, isn't it? It's going to render the older EVs basically, like crap, isn't it? Nobody's going to want an EV that takes like hours to charge when you could have one that does it in 5 minutes.
So that's one of the things that Elon Musk has said for a long time. Nobody wants to listen to him anymore. But one of the things that he said was he's not really working on higher range for vehicles, because it's going to come down to just quick charging, where it's going to be like gas stations. You don't really need to add all that extra weight and extra cost to a vehicle when you're just going to have quick charging and like charging everywhere, which makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? People have that kind of range anxiety and stuff like that, don't they? With EVs, you certainly wouldn't have that in this situation, because you could probably fill it up there at the same in the same sort of time period as with a gas car.
And like GM kind of did a different tact when they did with that Hummer. I'm not sure why they picked the Hummer as one of their first EVs to do. and it's this massive vehicle that has this massive battery and massive expensive, and yeah, so that's the other side of that coin, right? Massive vehicle with a massive battery, which means more costs, leads to the expense of it, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense if you could do faster charging and have charging available in more places, then that would make a lot more sense than having massive batteries. Maybe for commercial use, like, at a mine site or something, that makes more sense.
Yeah, but I guess maybe that's like a prestige car or something, isn't it? And people are thinking more about just how cool it looks rather than like what it can do.
The Hummer?
Yeah.
It's a massive vehicle. There you go. In our meme section, we got a few memes here to share, and I thought they were quite funny. We play off, this is all comedy. Let's remember, this is comedy, so don't get all worked up. Federal judge orders astronauts to be returned to the space station. Biden did not want them to be rescued by Elon Musk.
Also quite a hilarious dig at judicial overreach in the United States, which I find coming from the sort of Anglo system, and living still in the Anglo system in Canada, the power of the judges in America is like absolutely crackers, isn't it? How they can just kill, like, one random judge in some random part of the US could just kill the executives' ideas. Like they can work for years on a plan and then implement it, and the judge is just like, nah, and then it's just dead. I mean, that is whatever. That's how they designed their system, but it's funny.
And Trump turmoil, that's a good name for him, Trump turmoil. And this is a funny one as well. Draws names out of the hat for the next country to torment. Trump's turmoil torment. And he's tormenting nations, and he just draws them out of the hat. How's that? That looks like an AI-generated image as well.
It looks like a Photoshop generated image to me. It's not as good as AI.
There you go. I don't know who he's going to attack next with his tariffs, but there you go. And the last
probably
one,
a friend.
A friend, yeah. And this one is funny as all get out. I was in Calgary actually at the mall, and my wife doesn't really want me eating any more sugar, so but these Girl Guides are out in front of the Canadian Tire there, and they're in the cold, minus 15 in Calgary, and so I bought a box of Girl Guide cookies. They've gone up in price though, $6 for the regular cookies, because they also sell those mint cookies too, which I actually really like. But I'd finished off all the dark ones, and my wife's finally going to have one because we're driving home to Kelowna. And she said, would you want another one? And do you have a favorite kind? And then she says, obviously you do, because all the black ones are gone. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the vanilla ones, so there you go. When's the last time you bought some Girl Guide cookies?
Well, I tried to buy some a few weeks ago, and they didn't accept card. They only accepted old-fashioned money. And obviously, I was like, who carries money these days? I don't have any money. So it's been a while, because if you're going to be cash only, then you're not going to get much money out of people aged under like 60, I would say.
They gotta get their little Stripe card or something like going on.
Definitely. I also feel that way about the I can't even remember the name of the poppies. Yeah, it's like, I want to give you money and I want a poppy, but I mean, I don't have cash because nobody uses cash anymore.
Well,
So I'm sorry, Mr. Poppy Man.
Sorry, especially you being married, you're not allowed to have cash, right?
All transactions must be monitored. Yeah.
Talk about Orwellian. There you go. Don't let your wife watch this one. That's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow at 9 o'clock. It's about an hour long. We're just about bang on an hour today as well. And you can find us here on YouTube, streaming live, on X, streaming live, on my X, and on Kelowna Now's X. And you can also go on KelownaNow.com, sign up for our newsletter, which we deliver to your inbox 365 days a year before 7 a.m. So all the news that's fit to read. And we get zero funding from the government, so we appreciate your support and your comments, of course. And we thank the regulars that are here. Brett, thank you for joining us every morning. So love to see more of you guys. So if you like what you see, share and get some more of your friends watching. That'd be great. We'd appreciate that. And we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local.